Welcome everyone, it's great to be here again to have another chat. This week we welcome Tim to the table.
Whoa.
So today what we want to talk about is how we deal with this sense of being out of control, because again, we live in a pretty crazy world. Do one of you want to sort of paint the picture of what we're going to be talking about today?
Well, I guess we're talking about control and that we are people who need control. For most of us to be able to achieve our purpose or our vision or to express our gifts, our ability, our creativity, all those beautiful things in life, it requires a certain amount of control because you actually have to exercise your free will to actually bring into existence all those kinds of things or to channel that energy. And for many of us at the moment, a lot of that stuff has gone. We're no longer in control of all of that stuff that we would normally be doing. You know, what's our dream? What's our goal for 2020? It's all gone. And some of us are sitting at home going, what on earth am I going to do?
My wife, she loves to be organised. She bought the perfect calendar that's been sitting up in our kitchen. She bought the perfect calendar and had everything listed up there. And then just the other day, she's here looking at everything that's been crossed out. And so she said to me, do I fix it or do I just scrunch it up and throw it in the bin? She just tore it up.
Oh,
So her world is just it's just gone. It's just done.
I think another thing about when we're not in control, often we feel absolutely helpless, and that can be a very, very uncomfortable feeling. It can feel like we're free falling through life. We don't know what we're going to hit, where we're going to land. We don't know how we're going to cope, and that can be very, very disconcerting for a lot of people.
Yeah, well, I mean, some things, just even like we can get sleepy, we can lose energy because it's kind of like we feel like we can't control, so everything just begins to shut down. So it's a weird space to be
Hormonally,
in.
we just change. We become different
We
people.
do. We
Like
do.
last week you spoke about that flight, fight or freeze.
Freeze.
When we're in that state, we're just in a different hormonal response. And parts of our body literally just shut down, don't they?
They do.
And so we do have these altered sense of health and sense of being, which we touched on last week. But, you know, all that lack of sleep, that lack of human function just really derives from that stress, doesn't it? That stress response.
Yeah, because our body's gone into this kind of survival mode.
You had a great analogy for it earlier on when you talked about an avalanche. Do you want to unpack that?
Oh, you said it better than what I could say.
That's a lie.
Let's fight over it. Let's fight over
Well, we
who said
talked
it
about
best.
how sometimes being out of control can feel like we're in this avalanche, how all of a sudden we feel overwhelmed by everything else that's coming down around us and we feel swept up by it, and then we wake up and the world looks like a totally different place. It looks like a totally different landscape. All the old landmarks, our work, our social circles, all of this sort of stuff can just be wiped clean sometimes, can't it? And leaves us feeling so disorientated, I suppose.
Yeah.
For lack of a better term. So as we come to grips with the fact that we are out of control, why is it important that we sort of wrestle with the idea behind that as opposed to just the symptoms of it? Do you know what I mean?
So wrestle with the fact that we are people who need control.
Yeah.
Well, because we have to regain control over what we can control, and we need to let go of the things that we can't control. So we do have to go through that process, because otherwise we'll just stay. If we don't make that distinction between what we can control and what we can't control, we'll just stay stuck.
And we get sick. We get sick. If we're trying to control the uncontrollable, we do get sick.
Yeah, we just get anxious, divided, sad.
Yeah, not real great. So you, Tim, we've invited you here because you've got a story to share with us about a time in your life that was sort of similar in some sense to what we're experiencing today. Do you want to share?
Yeah, there was a time in my life when there was an absolute crisis that was happening that was totally outside of our control. Now, it didn't involve a pandemic, so it was very different in that sense. But back in the 1990s, then Prime Minister Paul Keating talked about a recession that we had to have. Well, a lot of us didn't like the fact that we had to have that recession. And back then I was a director of the financial services company. And as the markets crashed, we found that that business just dried up. It's a bit like today in a way. And we found that all of a sudden we were making losses of between $20,000 a month and $40,000 a month.
Wow.
And we're a small Tasmanian-based company that had a number of offices, and we were looking at how can we survive this. And they were also at the times when personal interest rates were very high. Sharon and I had a mortgage where we were paying about 17%.
I just cannot even fathom that being possible.
Trust
so
me,
that's
it was.
that housing loan, and then we had a business loan on top
That's
of
right.
that.
You guys are mad.
That's right. That was the environment that we're in, where the business had borrowings, and so it was paying a big interest rate, and then us on top of it. And if one had have gone over, we would have been like a house of cards, and it was a high stress time. And I remember one evening I was sitting at home at the bench in our kitchenette, and stressing about it. And I've been carrying a lot of stress for a period of time. How can we get through this? What if we don't? What if we lose everything? And then, as clearly as day, just some thoughts came through to me. And what occurred to me was this: even if I lose everything, I've still got my family, I've still got my health, and the sun's still going to come up tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after. And I realised that the things that I was struggling to control were actually outside of my control. And just worrying about things that were outside of my control was making me unhealthy. And as soon as I realised that, and realised about the things that I had to concentrate on what I could control and let go of the things that I couldn't, an incredible sense of peace came back to me, and anxiety just disappeared.
Wow. Powerful. So I suppose where I want to go with that is, it sounds like that previous trial or story is sort of, there's some lessons out of that are helping you today, but do you think that overarching experience has prepared you for this?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I can see very, very close parallels today in how we're responding and others are responding with wisdom. It's very, very a similar pattern to what happened back then. For example, just working out what you can control and what you can't is a very, very healthy first step. And when we try and control things that we can't actually control, we're just going to get sick. And we're going to waste a lot of emotional energy on things that won't make any difference. And also that's going to distract us from focusing on the things that we can do something about. So going back to that era as well, I guess there are three things that came out of that. One is the fact that we had to focus immediately on the things that we could change. And I'll give you a small example. One of the things was we cancelled all the newspaper subscriptions just to try and stop cash leaking in that particular area. And we went through and just tried to work out every possible thing that we could do, and we actioned it straight away.
And that's really what the government are doing at the moment.
Yes.
To protect us all and
exactly.
to get us through. They're kind of thinking through all the things that we can control with this virus, and encouraging us to do all the things we can do.
Yeah, and I think there's a second parallel to the second point as well. There's another parallel to the second point, and that is that whilst the focus was on the immediate, the focus also had to be on the future, because one day this season will end. And I remember back in the 1990s with a business, on one hand we were cutting everything we could, but on the other hand we're actually preparing ourselves to be healthy for that one day when we actually got through it. And we made decisions. For example, there were some younger people in our company who we saw the future, that they were important to the future. And whereas some of the more senior people in the company wanted to cull those people to actually take their jobs away from them, we actually thought that if we do that, we're not going to have a future. And so we did all we possibly could to protect those people for the future.
Yeah, wow.
And I guess there's a third thing as well, and this didn't come out until some time later, but we were determined to recession-proof our company through that period of time. And it started as thinking, and it started as planning, and we used to then have regular planning sessions. The key directors would have regular planning sessions, and out of that came a strategy which dramatically changed our company a couple of years later. And if we hadn't have been through the hard times, we would never have found the solutions, which ended up making it a highly successful and leading it to be a successful national company instead of a small struggling Tasmanian company.
Wow.
So out of that you developed, because I've seen you apply those principles time after time, throughout our married life together, as we've done life.
As we strategise
So
our
they're
marriage.
kind of like your what's in your resilience bag.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was formed through a really difficult, adverse circumstance. But what about, because I'm kind of thinking there are a lot of young people who haven't yet formed that resilience back. I mean, 9/11's the closest thing you've experienced.
That's right.
And even that was a fairly distant.
Yeah.
It was an emotional impact. Wow.
But it didn't really change my world.
No, whereas this has changed
Absolutely.
so many things for you.
Yeah.
And then I think of our teenagers.
They haven't faced anything like this before at
Yeah.
all. Absolutely not, no.
Yeah, so they've got nothing in their resilience bag yet, have
Not
they?
yet.
But this can be an
You will soon.
opportunity. Do you see it as an opportunity for them? A great opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I suppose, you go on.
Sharon, I remember your grandfather speaking to you when you were still alive about how he survived a recession back in the 1930s. And you kept on repeating these stories to us as well because they've been passed down to you, where he'd go off possum trapping up on the Central Plateau and doing all of these things, and how hard it was to have any money whatsoever during the times of a recession. And I saw the value of story being passed down to you. So whilst you hadn't actually experienced that yourself, you had the benefit of someone else's story. And perhaps that's something that we who have been through life circumstances that some of the younger ones haven't, perhaps there's some way that we can also pass that story on to them.
That's really good.
Yeah, because I think remembering is really important, isn't it? It's to remember. It reworks the brain in some kind of way. It gives a story, a narrative for us to hang on to. Oh, this is how they got through that situation. I think it also gives hope, doesn't it? That people have survived complex and difficult seasons, and there is a life after the complexity.
Yeah, there's one classic story in the Bible about that, where the whole nation of Israel had come out of walking through the wilderness, and they came into the better times as they came towards the promised land. And God instructed them to build a cairn of rocks so that they could always remember. And it was a sign to perpetually remember them of the past, because often we won't appreciate the goodness, the good things that are actually happening, unless we understand where we've come from and understand the past.
So as a young person, this concept is really appealing, and I think it could be really powerful for the next generations. So this idea of your generation, maybe the ones just younger than you, definitely those older than you, passing on that communal identity of, we can pass through this season. Is there some practical ways that we can do that in our families and in our communities after today?
I
Do you have any ideas?
I don't know if you remember
Here we go.
when you were a kid.
Careful.
We would often have really interesting people over for meals. Do you remember how we would
Like Rachel?
invite lots of really interesting speakers to come into our home, and they'd sit at the table, and they would often tell stories, and some of the stories were hilarious, but there was always a message of resilience behind the story.
That's great.
And I think that that's something that we can do is, I think as parents, we can intentionally sit down at the dinner table and we can tell a story. Try not to do it in a boring way, but to tell a story of how you came through a tough time, or how God helped you come through a tough time. Maybe it was a medical issue, or maybe you lost a job somewhere at some stage, and how you got through it. But I think the telling of story is really important. I also think that some of the older generation could share their stories on Facebook,
That'd be
just great. I remember when this happened.
Can I tell you a story?
Yeah. Can I tell you a story of a hard time I went through, and this is how we got through. And you don't even have to have all the handles of how you got through. Just the fact that you got through brings hope, I think, and reminds young people, this is a season, it will pass.
Yeah.
That's good. So what we're really talking about here is a story of resilience, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yes.
So in the middle of being out of control, we're learning from one another, and there's that strengthening that muscle, I suppose.
And I think when we try and keep control of the uncontrollable, we'll never develop resilience, because we're in a game that we're always going to lose, and we're going to get squashed in trying to do that. So we've got to realise what fights are worth fighting, and the things that we can't control, we've actually got to let go of, so we actually can pour our energies into the things that we can actually make progress in.
And I think we're also talking about generational richness here. If you share stories across the generations, there's a blessing in that.
Yeah.
There's a richness in that. There's community. People become more connected. They come closer together. Respect happens. It's really, really powerful.
That's good.
Yeah. But I think that the older generation have to take the initiative, because it's a hard ask to ask a 12 or a 15-year-old to say, hey, tell me a story.
I don't know if I know many 13-year-old kids that are going to go and ask, tell me a story.
No, but I remember how much Michael was blessed when he actually went and did the video of his grandfather for his 80th birthday, and his grandfather was there telling stories about the past. And it was just a huge eye-opener for him, and just opened up a whole new perspective in quite a few areas.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. I think one of the beautiful things that the Jewish community do is with their Sabbath, they begin a part of their Sabbath day rest by blessing the next generation. So when they sit for a meal, the grandparents or the father, they go around and they actually bless each child and remind them of their race, the fact that they're a called people, that they just speak identity over them. And I think that there's just power when you sit down at the table, whether it's a single mum or mum and dad, and you just intentionally put story into your children's lives so that then they can come through this with hope, assurance, a narrative. People relate to narrative, to story. It's just so powerful.
I think underlying where we can actually let go of the things that we can't control is also where we can actually trust God or not. And if we can't trust God, and if we don't believe that God has our interests at heart, if we believe that he is indifferent to us or wants to harm us, we'll want to keep control. And that just doesn't make sense. Romans 8:28 talks about the fact that God will work all things for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And so if we're in that zone, and if we actually have lock onto that passage, and if we believe that it's true, we can then trust that there's some things that are just too big for me. I'm not God. I can't change the recession. I can't change a pandemic that's here at the moment. But we can trust that God will find a way.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it?
Yeah, it is good.
Just changing pace a little bit now. I think you had something that you want to share about some sort of Ant-Man or something like that. Is that fair?
Well, I was just thinking, we were just talking about how all the little things that you can control. Maybe in this season, there's a dream that you've never had time to, flesh out. Maybe there's a business plan that you've never had time to write. Maybe there's a budget that you've never had time to put together, Tim. Sore point in our marriage.
Why did you go there, Jonathan?
Maybe there's a craft activity you haven't done. Maybe there's books that you've wanted to read you haven't been able to read.
Or some online study that you wanted to do.
Yeah, maybe there's all these things that you haven't been able to do, but you can do. And I think it's a little bit like in Proverbs, it talks about how it says, watch what the ant does. And the thing about an ant is that it picks up a little grain of sand and it moves it very slowly across a distance. And it does that, and you can't really see what it's doing until you come back, say, a week later or a few weeks later, and all of a sudden you see that it's built this great big new tunnel, this new
A nest.
a new nest, a new whatever it is that they do. And it's quite phenomenal. And I think that that's what it is in this season, is doing all the little things that you can do. And at the end of this, in a few months' time, we look back, it's like the nest, looking at like at an ant's tunnel, we see there's a new life. There's there's lots of new that we've actually created.
Yeah. Did you have anything to add to that one?
No, absolutely. It's just as Sharon was saying, it's about doing the little things to get a big result. If we expect to do something and just get a big result straight off, often we're going to be severely disappointed. But keep on doing the little things. And as I say, how does an ant eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
And I'm really looking forward to all the creativity, because I love creativity and I love pioneering and entrepreneurial stuff. And I kind of go, okay, there's a lot of dreams that have maybe gone up in smoke. There's a lot of brokenness. But you know what? Those same people who created all that beauty and wonder and innovation and entrepreneurial, they've still got that gift. You've still got that gift.
Yep.
You've still got that talent. You've still got that call on your life. You've still got that purpose. It's all sitting there. And I think in this space, it'll be... what's it called, like reworked, it'll be...
There's opportunity that will be created.
There's so much opportunity that's going to come out of this, and I'm just really hoping to see the beauty that's going to come out of this space of reflection and slow and thoughtfulness.
Yeah, I think one of the things that often holds us back is paradigms and mindsets and traditions, and we think this is all we can do. A lot of it's just been smashed now. And as Sharon is saying, we've still got the creativity within us, but we don't have those bounds to actually keep us tied down to certain ways of doing things. And we're seeing all over the world at the moment, people are trying new things, like going online with church and things like that, just as one little example. But it's because they can't do what they've always done, so therefore they have to do something new. So it's a time of incredible innovation that we're coming into, where creativity is going to be unleashed in brand new ways, and that's exciting as well.
That's very good. So maybe if we just recap things a little bit. So we spoke a little bit about how feeling out of control is pretty stressful. It's pretty exhausting.
Yes.
But if we don't face that, and if we don't learn to deal with that, then it just leaves us in even more of a wreck than what it needs to be.
Yep.
And then you had 3 key ways of thinking that you've learned. Do you just want to dot point those again?
So after we decide to let go what we can't control of, we then have to look at the immediate, or what action we can take, and doing those things straight away. But then as we're doing that, we've also got to have a mind to the future, where we're looking at the decisions that we make today, how will they influence the future as this season is passing? And so we can start sowing the seeds of the future already today. But then as we come out of it, we've got to look at what God wants to do. And often it's not evidenced in the middle of a storm. It's only after we come out of a storm and we see that He's been guiding us with wisdom all the way through, and the little decisions and the big decisions we've been making have probably been guided to take us in a direction. And then, so as we've come out of a storm, sometimes we can then have that new creativity, the new strategy, the new perspective, which will just change what we're doing. And so that's the third thing.
Yeah, great. So along those sorts of lines, we've created a bit of a resource at the end of the video. There's a bit of a reflection activity, which we're encouraging everybody to spend 10 minutes doing. Did you just want to quickly explain that one?
So it's just basically listing the things that you can't control, listing the things that you can control.
Yeah.
And going for it.
Hey?
Yeah.
And then the other thing that we spoke about today really was that we recognise the power of story. I think it's the best way of recapping that, about your previous experience can really build resilience to help you get through the current. Is that fair?
Yes, that's right.
And so I think the challenge for our community is can we pass that on to that younger generation?